Right now, there are over 29,000 games on Steam tagged as open world. If that's not a good enough metric, the largest releases of the year so far, Kingdom Come, Deliverance 2, Monster Hunter Wilds, and Assassin's Creed Shadows are all open world. So is Grand Theft Auto 6, which is allegedly also coming this year. Open world games are increasingly common and practically impossible to avoid. Fans have rejoiced whenever games make the jump to open world as they start becoming more and more common, but the video game industry has hit a tipping point. There are too many open world games and it makes all of them worse. Early games did not have the computing power to create a proper open world, so as technology progressed and developers could do more, it made sense that developers wanted to do more. As more and more powerful consoles that could handle a whole open world came out, the fact that there was an uptick in open world games is fine. It's not necessarily a problem for developers who want to make an open world game to do so. The problem is that increasingly open worlds are the default choice. It's something players and developers alike treat as something that can only help the game, but that's not the case. It's a design decision and needs to be treated as such. Every creative decision has its positives and negatives. There is nothing that can be added to a game that will only make it better. There's always going to be a downside. Developers should consider first and foremost whether an open world suits the game thematically or in terms of progression. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is the perfect example of a game that benefits from having an open world. Link wakes up with no clue who he is or what he's supposed to do, and that aimlessness is reflected in the fact that there's no set order for the player to explore things. This, however, does cause problems. One issue both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have is they constantly repeat exposition because the games don't know if the player already has the necessary information. It's always a trade-off, but it's a trade-off that works in the game's favour in the long run. Echoes of Wisdom, however, does not benefit from being an open world. The story is very linear, and certain parts are arbitrarily blocked off from the player until they have unlocked the proper story flags. There's nothing to be gained from going to the Deku Shrub village early, other than certain echoes, which are usually area contextual anyway. It would make more sense if, thematically, Zelda, a sheltered princess, slowly had her world expand as she experienced more and more of her own kingdom. At its worst, an open world can end up feeling empty or repetitive. The vast plots of open land with nothing but enemy bandits to fight or loot to find can get stale very quickly, if not handled with care. Some games are simply better being more linear. It's also true that linear vs open world is not a strict binary. Technically, Unicorn Overlord could be considered an open world. Nothing stops the player from immediately fighting the final boss beyond their level, and the knowledge that doing so would trigger a bad ending. Meanwhile, most Fire Emblem games work as linear campaigns where the player's army slowly moves to different areas, which works for those games. Even Assassin's Creed Shadows, an open-world game, showcases when linearity is preferable in gameplay. Assassin's Creed fans have been asking for something like the game's canon mode for years because having too many different dialogue options made it hard to resolve things into a coherent canon. If a game is going to be open world, it should be because it suits the game, not because slapping open world on the advertising makes it sell better. The video game industry has a bad habit of always following a trend. If Metroidvanias are popular, suddenly everything has to have Metroidvania elements. Roguelites are really in right now, so a lot of games have gotten roguelite modes. It's always bad creatively for a medium to narrow into a few popular genres, but in the case of video games, it's very bad because of how long games take to develop. If a studio is working on an open world game because they're popular and then they stop being popular after 5 years, they can't just pivot development. A game being open world is less alienating than a live service title like Concord, but they're still incredibly common and starting to get synonymous with bloated stories and repetitive bland fights. A lot of games will end up arbitrarily inserting open worlds because of the conception that being open world is more modern than linear map design. Fans were excited when Pokemon Scarlet and Violet announced they'd be the first truly open-world Pokemon games, but were ultimately disappointed because the games aren't built for a non-linear structure. Sure, players can go to the 7th gym first, but they'll be underleveled. They can hunt the Titan Pokemon in any order they want, but they'll always unlock upgrades in the same order, so it doesn't really matter in terms of unlocking new ways to explore. The Pokemon formula isn't suited to being done in any order, since there's a specific plot the game wants to achieve, and certain Pokemon literally don't have good moves at lower levels because they're not meant to be obtained at those levels. The tiresome discourse about yellow paint from 2023 is rooted in the same problem. Many games are designed without a coherent vision of how players will interact with them or how the design suits the gameplay, and then to cover up for that fact, developers have to mark the important areas to make up for it. This just throw it in approach also harms games that do think about map design and want to be innovative. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a game that attempted to do something interesting with its open world by limiting fast travel and forcing players to slowly explore the world on foot. The idea was to get players to experience more of the world and take in the surrounding landscape. However, in practice, many players were simply annoyed by having to walk everywhere because games that don't have that level of consideration have taught them to expect to be able to fast travel wherever they need to go. It didn't help that items needed to fast travel in Dragon's Dogma 2 were sold as DLC, leading to the impression that fast travel was a necessary part of the game that was being paywalled. Everyone doing open worlds is leading to open worlds becoming worse and worse. The entire subgenre is beginning to stagnate, and it's because developers and fans aren't thinking about how the map design suits the game, but if the map hits all the checkboxes of what an open world game should be. There are plenty of fantastic open world games, and the issue isn't that they exist. The problem is that since an open world is seen as the default, developers tend to focus on making their games open world instead of considering how that decision affects the end product. There are talented, visionary developers working on open world games that take advantage of all that entails. If the reason for making a game open world isn't something like, this suits our project because of XYZ, then it should go back to the drawing board, either so that they can come up with an idea that suits an open world better, or to refocus on something more linear, depending on what the overall goals and vision for the game are. It's 2025, and it should be increasingly obvious that players respond better to passion projects than big budget games doing exactly what's expected of them. Developers don't have to stop making open world games, but they should stop forcing open worlds into every single title and focus on doing what's best for the game.